Good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Michael Cunningham, and today we have a very special series of lectures that you're going to hear all about Belarus, the Minsk connection, and what we see at the Kennedy assassination 60 years after the fact on November 22nd, 12:30 in the afternoon in Dallas, Texas. I have a distinct pleasure to introduce two people, and they will introduce some others. Dr. Fetzer, I've known for about 15 years or so. And Dr. Fetzer is a professor emeritus from the University of Minnesota, Duluth, and is a very acknowledged expert in the JFK assassination. And also joining with us is Pablo. Pablo is with the Embassy of Belarus here in the United States, and he will introduce his guests. But before we get to him, Dr. Fetzer, if you'd like to say just a few words from Wisconsin.
Well, I'm simply overjoyed to join with Russian scholars and students on the occasion of the 60th observance. It was unbelievable how Russia would have been blamed to have anything to do with the assassination, but then that's the CIA way to cover up their crimes. And among the reasons why conspiracy research is denigrated here in the United States, because more often than not, it leads back to those who were responsible more often than not in the government itself. A great pleasure to be here today.
And Pablo, if you could introduce your people, please.
Yes, my name is Pavel Shidlovsky. I'm Chief of Mission with the Embassy of Belarus in Washington, D.C. I have a pleasure of participating in this event and look forward to the presentations. The Belarusian side will be represented by distinguished representatives of the Faculty of International Relations, Department of International Relations with the Belarusian State University. The dean of the department, Dr. Yelena Dostanka, will be present, and I will give her the floor after my introduction. Then there will be Professor Alexander Bychorov, Professor of the International Relations Department, Doctor of Philosophy. His speech will be on the issue of the anniversary of the assassination of U.S. President Kennedy. Svetlana Svila's presentation is called Memories of Lee Harvey Oswald. I understand she couldn't make it, so the presentation will be made by the students of the department. Then these presentations will be followed by Vladimir Snapkovsky's, who is Professor of International Relations Department, Doctor of History. His presentation is called The Position of Belarus on the Genocide of the Belarusian People During the Second World War. What is important for me, I would like to make two quick notes before I give the floor to Elena. First is that I had the pleasure a couple of years ago to visiting with the delegation from Belarus, the sixth floor museum in Dallas, Texas, and see how everything unfolded and feel the atmosphere of that tragedy of that day. And the other thing which is very important is that one of the presenters, Professor Bychorov, I've known him for 30 years, and he was a distinguished diplomat then when I entered as a junior diplomat in the Foreign Service. And Professor Snapkovsky, his works inspired my son, who has just graduated from that faculty, to write 3 theses on Belarus-US relations, including his diploma thesis earlier this year. So I'm very pleased to say that. Also, I wanted to mention 2 quick things. Speaking of genocide, that the Prosecutor General of Belarus mentioned yesterday in his speech to the media. One thing is that it has been uncovered that at least 180 death squad operations of the Nazis and their enablers were held in the years of the Second World War in the territory of Belarus. And actually the formations that carried out these crimes and these death squad operations were represented by almost all the countries of the Western Europe. And the task of the Prosecutor General and his office is to subject to criminal responsibility every one of Nazi and Nazi enabler who has remained alive, although they are currently abroad and take advantage of the protection of foreign states and take refuge in these foreign states. And the other thing which is very important that the Prosecutor General said is that over 42,000 of archived criminal cases against Nazis and their enablers have been declassified since 2021 during the investigation into the genocide of the population of Belarus in the Second World War. So this figure is very impressive. With that, I will hand the floor over to Dr. Dostanko, and I really hope that our today's event, our today's online meeting will shed more light into uncovering the greatest of the mysteries of the 20th century. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Elena Dostanko, and greetings from Belarusian State University, capital city Minsk. Dear Dr. Cunningham, dear Pavel Adamovich, I would like to thank you very much for this opportunity to organize and to take part in this video conference on such event in the history of world politics. As Pavel Adamovich has introduced our speakers, also we have here in our room teachers of International Relations Department. Unfortunately, Professor Svilas Svetlana couldn't participate in person today. Honestly speaking, she has a medical appointment which could not be rescheduled, but her students will present her presentation. I think it will be also very good. So thank you very much, and we wish to each other a very good event today. Thank you.
Mike, you want the first speaker to proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry.
First speaker, please proceed.
So we will start with our speakers, right?
Yes,
So
go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, thank you very much. And I give a floor to Alexander Mukhtarovich Bayshorov. He's a professor of our department, doctor of philosophy, distinguished diplomat, and he will give us talk on the following topic on the issue of the anniversary of the assassination of US President John Kennedy. Take a floor, please.
Hello, Michael. Hello, everyone. Quite recently, I read a book written by Greg Iles. The name of the book is Bone Tree. And this is the New York Times bestseller book. And it was published in 2015. And it touches upon the issue of JF Kennedy assassination. So it shows that even today, this topic is close to the hearts and minds of many Americans, and even some people in my country remember those days. JF Kennedy was not only a great American, he was a great personality in international politics. He changed perceptions, and he managed to avoid nuclear confrontation between Soviet Union and the United States. During his presidential campaign, John Kennedy accused Dwight Eisenhower of creating a missile gap with the USSR. But later, when he assumed office and was briefed, he considered that USA is ahead of USSR on ICBMs, International Ballistic Missiles. Nevertheless, he took first steps in nuclear arms control, which is a very close subject to my heart. And it was John Kennedy who created in 1961 the US Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, which became a very important executive organization to conduct arms control negotiations for many years. The world of communism and the world of free choice have been caught up in a vicious cycle of conflicting ideology and interest. Each increase of tension has produced an increase of arms. Each increase of arms has produced an increase of tension. And under these circumstances, JF Kennedy presented his plan for nuclear disarmament. He presented it at the meeting of the General Assembly in New York on September 25, 1961. His plan was straightforward and actually was being implemented for years to come. First point of his plan was signing the Test Ban Treaty. Second point, stopping the production of fissionable materials for use in weapons. Third point, prohibiting the transfer of control over nuclear weapons to states that do not own them. Fourth, keeping nuclear weapons from seeding new battlegrounds in outer space. Fifth, gradually destroying existing nuclear weapons and converting their materials to peaceful uses. And finally, halting the unlimited testing and production of strategic nuclear delivery vehicles and gradually destroying them as well. And it was not just plans. JF Kennedy was the president of great deeds. It was he who signed first ever nuclear arms control treaty in 1963, 3 months before his death. He signed the limited test ban treaty with the USSR and UK. So now when we remember JFK and the mystery of his death still with us, many of his deeds were not so well accepted by the public opinion at that time. What he was doing for the relaxation of tension between the USSR and USA was not always accepted on other side of the divide. So it's a great occasion to remember of this great son of America. And we will remember JF Kennedy for what he has done in many fields, including the field of arms control. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Should we go for Q&A session in the end of our, after all the presentations, right?
We can, or we could ask a few questions now if we may, because the speaker brought up some really good points about nuclear arms, and where United States and many countries today are seeing an increase in tensions. do you think that we need more people like President Kennedy, more foresight type people in foreign policy, or do you think that he would be more accepted today than he was even in 1961 to 63?
I don't think so. Just maybe 5 years ago, I would say, yes, you're right. But now, under the circumstances, if there is such a great confrontation between Russia, USA, and some other countries in international arena, arms control is no longer a fashionable matter. Arms control is like something, it had its great achievements, but it's mostly in the past. But I think there will come a day when it again will become a fashion. Thank you.
Dr. Fetzer, you have a question?
Well, I think his point is impeccable that arms control was a sane approach to dealing with nuclear arms, that the era of mutually assured destruction was an era of stability, because both superpowers realized that if they were to attack the other, they'd be inviting their own annihilation. And now, unfortunately, the mediocrity of today's leadership in the United States has led to a situation that greatly imperils the future of humanity. We've abandoned all of these very carefully constructed arms control treaties and even acknowledged that we are prepared to make a first strike, which is as destabilizing a policy as one could possibly envision. John Kennedy was a visionary ahead of his time, and in part that was the reason he was taken out.
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, excellent presentation. Very well taken. About a month or so ago, I got to go to a campaign rally for his nephew, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's running for president. And he was talking very much about the same things that you were talking about stability in politics and stuff like this. Do you foresee that if we change leadership, that we could actually fulfill some of Kennedy's promises that he made back in 61?
Okay, and now we have a time for presentation of our professor, Svetlana Svilas. As I told before, she's not with us today on personal circumstances, and we have a short video from her, and then it will be followed by a presentation. So the title of her presentation is Memories of Lee Harvey Oswald. Please. Sorry, 1 second, please.
You want to use the share screen function, of course, to
Yeah,
access the
just a
video.
second, we're in process. Yeah, sorry. Ничего не слышно.
Go to full screen. No audio.
Can you hear us?
Oh, yes, now.
And you cannot see the video, right?
No, we
We
could
could-
see it. We couldn't hear it.
Не могут.
You may have to do the share sound on the screen share. There's over the left bottom. Click.
Okay, colleagues, so we will go right to the presentation because we have some technical problems. Now we will start with presentation, okay?
Sure.
Sorry about this. Can you see it?
Yes.
Colleagues? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it's fine.
We are going to tell you about Lee Harvey Oswald in Minsk. On the 7th of January in 1960, Lee Harvey Oswald, an American born in 1939, arrived in Minsk, and in May 1962, he left the capital of Soviet Belarus to return home with his Russian wife Marina, maiden name Prusakova, and little daughter June. On
We lost the sound.
Can you hear
Now.
us?
I can hear you. I can't hear the speaker.
Okay.
We decided to find out why Oswald decided to leave the USA,
Can you hear right now the speaker?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Okay.
but returned to his homeland a short time later. How he lived in Minsk in January 1960, May 1962, what he did, who he was friends with, and how people treated him.
Oswald's arrival in the capital of the Soviet Republic was preceded by his service in the US Marine Corps, his enthusiasm for Marxism and the ideas of the Cuban Revolution, and his interest in the experience of the USSR. He arrived in Moscow on a short-term tourist visa, but after being denied Soviet citizenship, he attempted suicide. After a course of treatment by psychiatrists, Oswald was sent to Minsk with a residence permit. In a small city with a good supply, it was easier to control a foreigner, respected of CIA connections, and to show the advantages of socialism.
Two attractive women from the Red Cross met Oswald at the railway station to accompany him to the Minsk hotel, the best in the city. With one of them, the blonde Rosa, Oswald almost immediately started an affair. On the 8th of January 1960, he met the mayor Vasily Sharapov, who promised to provide him with a separate flat, and on the 10th of January, he took a walk around the city, which he liked very much. According to outside surveillance, Oswald went into room and made his first purchase, an electric clock.
On the 11th of January in 1960, the immigrant first visited his place of work, a radio factory, where he met the head of the department, a Jew, Alexander Zeger, who had immigrated from Western Belarus to Argentina before the war, but returned in 1955. Zeger was fluent in English, but the physicist Stanislav Shishkevich, one of the future leaders of independent Belarus, was assigned to teach Oswald Russian.
In his diary notes, January 1960, Oswald writes about his income. 700 rubles salary plus 700 rubles from the Red Cross, almost like a factory director. At the factory, he did like the portrait of Lenin on the wall and the compulsory morning gymnastics. 2 months later, Oswald gets a small one-room flat with all facilities in a beautiful house near the factory. The address is Kalinina 4, flat 24. This is the center of Minsk. The fee was only 60 rubles a month. At that time, such accommodation was a luxury even for a family of 4. Before moving in, security authorities installed listening devices because they suspected Oswald of espionage. In the spring of 1960, Oswald met Pavel Gorbachev, his peer, who lived nearby, spoke excellent English, and had a radio engineering degree. They became friends. His father was Pavel Gorbachev, a pilot, twice hero of the Soviet Union, and a participant in the Second World War. Oswald spent the 1st of May of 1960 at a party at the Zeger family, where Alexander Zeger advised him to return. In his diary notes for August-September 1960, Oswald mentions progress in learning Russian, but he dislikes the public gymnastics, compulsory meetings after work, lectures on political topics, and sending workers to harvest potatoes. On the 18th of October in 1960, Oswald celebrated his 21st birthday. He was congratulated by Pavel Gorbachev, Rosa and Ella German, a beautiful Russian Jewess, whom he met at the factory in May. Ella studied at the Institute of Foreign Languages, but poverty forced her to go to the correspondence department. Oswald met her at Ella's place on New Year's Eve, 1961, and offered to marry her, but was refused. The girl had heard about his numerous love affairs. As the diary notes show, as early as a year after his arrival, Oswald reconsiders his desire to stay. Argument: monotonous work, no place to spend money, no nightclubs, no bowling areas, no recreational facilities. Moreover, union parties are tedious for him. On the 1st of February in 1961, he made his first request to the US Embassy in Moscow to return and received an invitation to come for an interview. On the 17th of March, attending a party at the Palace of Trade Unions, Oswald meets Marina Prusakova, a girl in a red dress, white shoes, wearing a French haircut. She was born in 1941 near Arkhangelsk and moved to Minsk from Leningrad to live with her uncle at the age of 16 after the death of her relatives. Ilya Prusakov was a military engineer and worked in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Marina started to be a pharmacist, worked in a pharmacy, and was popular with men. Not even a month and a half after they met, Oswald married her to annoy Ella and didn't tell his wife about his desire to return to the United States. On the 30th of April and the 1st of May of 1962, 2 photos were taken of the happy newlyweds. In 2013, Marina sold her first husband's wedding ring at an auction in Boston for $108,000. The inside of the ring was engraved with a hammer and sickle. In June 1961, Oswald told Marina of his plans, and the following month he traveled to Moscow for an interview. His return to the United States was delayed by Marina's pregnancy. On the 15th of February in 1962, the Oswalds had a daughter, June, but the young family began to quarrel as partially declassified documents of the state security agencies confirmed. Marina dreamed of marrying a Jew or a foreigner in order to leave the USSR, but after becoming a mother, she began to be afraid of domestic difficulties in the new country. On the 22nd of May in 1962, the Oswald family left Minsk. They were accompanied by Pavel Gorbachev and the Zeger family. Alik lived in the city for about 2 years and a half. After 55 years, the presentation of Alexander Lukashev's book, Oswald in Minsk, took place in the capital of Belarus, and the film about him was shown on Belarusian television in November 2018. The book and the film complement Norman Mailer's book, Oswald's Story, An American Mystery, as well as the novel and TV series by Stephen King. In the memories of the children who lived in the same house with Oswald, including Svetlana Svilas, a future professor of international relations at Belarusian State University, he appears as a cheerful, slim, stylish, neat, generous, musical, open-minded young man nicknamed American, whose every appearance in the yard with his beautiful wife aroused curiosity. It was Oswald who first saw jeans on. His jacket and trousers were different from our father's clothes. Uncle Sergei, the friend's father from the kindergarten, lived with his family in the same house on the ground floor. In the assessment of Sergei's scope, a toolmaker of the highest category, mentor of the American, Oswald was calm, kind, not angry. He had no special desire to work. He went on a 2-hour sit-down strike demanding higher wages, often rested during the working day with his feet on the machine. Also, he was incapable of murder due to his character. He was a member of the hunting club at the factory. However, he was a poor child. Oswald's work colleagues and acquaintances characterized him in different ways. A lover of popular fetish, a typical playboy with a constant attraction to the female sex, a simple guy, withdrawn, burdened with family worries, weak-willed and quiet, mannerly, liked to draw attention to himself in public places, absolutely ordinary person. In the memoirs of Eric Titovets, a medical student and future doctor of biological sciences, Oswald is an intellectual, a supporter of the theory of convergence of two systems, a lover of classical music and cinema, a regular visitor to the opera theater, the Philharmonic, and the State Library. None of Oswald's acquaintances in Minsk recognized his personality as a future terrorist. In any case, let us agree with Alexander Lukashev's opinion that Oswald's influence on the course of events of the 20th century was no greater than the influence of a moth under the wheels of a train on its scheduled arrival at the station. Conclude on the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy, let us emphasize that the American president is an example of realism in politics and willingness to compromise. His behavior, just like that of Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev during the Caribbean crisis, was wise and courageous. They both stood up to the hawks in their countries and managed to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. This was our presentation from Professor Svilas, Memories of Lee Harvey Oswald. Should we go ahead, right?
Yes, go ahead.
And
Well-
I'm giving,
I'd like to make a couple comments.
right, okay.
I found that utterly fascinating. Now, Lee was recruited while he was by the Office of Naval Intelligence when he was undergoing recruit training at San Diego. He was stationed at our most secure base at Tsugi, the source of the U-2 overflights. He performed a pseudo defection to Russia at the behest of the CIA to provide them information about altitude of the overflights, such that when there was going to be the summit between Khrushchev and Eisenhower, Khrushchev accused the United States of spying on the Soviet Union, which Eisenhower dutifully denied. Khrushchev then produced the pilot who had not taken his cyanide tablet, Francis Gary Powers, and parts of the U-2, and that led to the abortion of the summit and an increase in world tensions rather than a diminution. I infer from what you have said here that part of Oswald's role was to marry a Russian woman. These affairs and all that, and his eagerness to get married suggests to me that was part of his assignment on behalf of the CIA. And of course, those were astute and correct observation that he didn't appear to be the type of character who would become a terrorist. He wasn't a terrorist. He was actually an agent working for the American government, as Soviet authorities correctly inferred. And he was being set up after he returned to the United States to be the patsy, but who didn't even fire a single shot. This is fascinating. I am so appreciative of what you presented about his life there. Wonderful.
Yeah, I would like to make a comment too. It's kind of interesting because she mentioned a poor shot, which plays into a role that Jim is going to talk about later. But also, it mentions something in the respect that she said that she had lived in that same apartment. I mean, the same place that Lee Harvey Oswald did. And she had those recollections. It's really fascinating to know that we have people who are alive today, who are vibrant, that can remember stuff like this and never were asked questions before at least by maybe some authors that went over to Belarus, but you get a whole different opinion of what she said about him as you would what we get to hear from our media and what we get to hear from our book. So I thought that was very good, excellent thing, and I would really send her all the appreciate. I'm very appreciative of what she did. That was very good work. Thank you. Let's go ahead with your next speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm giving floor to Professor Snapkovsky, Professor of the International Relations Department, Doctor of History, a very well-known Belarusian scientist in the field of international relations. And he will give a talk on the following topic: the position of Belarus on the genocide of Belarusian people during the Second World War II. Vladimir Evdokimovich.
Работает, да? Do you hear me good? Well,
Yes.
at the first, I would like to greet my American colleagues, Pavel Shedlovsky, my Serge de la Fête to America, yeah, my colleagues from the Faculty of International Relations. Today we have very great events to my mind. It devoted to the 60th anniversary of the assassination of the US President John F. Kennedy. Of course, it's tragedy in the US history, and how Mr. Michael Cunningham said and wrote, I quoted, "This is very important event in the US history," the end of citation. Maybe it is one more great American tragedy after Civil War. My question is, why what's more Belarus is here? The answer has already known. It's a figure of assassin or alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, who spent almost 3 years, to be exactly 2 years and a half in Minsk, married here and gave birth to a daughter here. Maybe it will be a big discovery for our American colleagues and for us here in Belarus that Professor Silas was acquainted with Oswald and his wife and told us a very interesting and impressionable story. I would like at the beginning to say a pair of words about my personal impressions on the assassination of the President John Kennedy, November 22, 2063, almost 60 years ago. Then, when I was 9 years old schoolboy, and now as an academician teacher of international relations and politics, I did not remember exactly where I have known about the assassination. My family in Vitebsk did not have a TV set. I have not read newspapers. I suppose I have known about it from radio set and from the talks in family between my parents. What did I feel? First of all, it's very simple feeling. What did Moscow or Soviet secret services decided to kill the American president? There was a strong belief in omnipotence of Soviet power. From one hand, my feeling. On the other hand, why the US and their secret services did not defend the President Kennedy? I felt a regret and even a sympathy to the President Kennedy. How do I think about it about 60 years later, and taking into account my 3-month stay in New York, in Columbia University in 1998. My Belarusian friend who helped me to find a cheaper stay in Harlem and who worked in the US near 10 years, named the Americans as a very naive people. And he had in mind not only ordinary people, but first of all, the US authorities. It was before September 11, 2001. I know that there were 4 inquests of the assassination. None of them did confirm the conspiracy. So I think now, as a researcher of international relations and politics, that the assassination of JFK was an American tragedy and a manifestation of the US political system weakness. Now about perception, its event by Belarusian politicians and diaspora. Chairman of Belarusian Secret Soviet, professor, our university and vice rector, Stanislav Shushkevich, wrote in his memories, his book, Moje życie, My Life, Memories, how he had a task from the party leader of the plant to communicate with Oswald, with whom he worked in the plant. Stanislav Shushkevich writes that 70% of Americans do not believe to blame Oswald, and he supports this opinion. He visited this building in 2008, building from Oswald killed American president, and he lived the same opinion. What does the Belarusian diaspora in the US think about this event, about this assassination? I'd like to quote Vital Kipel, chairman of Belarusian Institute of Science and Art in New York, in his book Belarusians in the United States, 1999 edition. He presented me the book with warm signature. I would like to quote from page 5. Belarus, or more precisely the city of Minsk, the capital of the republic, appears in the American press now and again in connection with the assassination of President John Kennedy. Some years before that tragedy, the alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, spent some time in a factory worker in Minsk. This phase of his life continues to intrigue history buffs. 30 years later, in 1993, American writer Norman Mailer spent time in Minsk researching Oswald's Belarusian soldier. I'd like to note that Kipel writes about Oswald as an alleged assassin. 2 years later, Kipel wrote in his book Belarus в США, book from our library, 3rd edition, 2020, that he did a special chapter in his English version book under the title Conceptualizing Belarus. Why? He wants to remember for American readers about events connected with Belarus. And one of these remarkable events was, of course, a figure of Oswald, whom people named as an assassin of JFK. And this author's reception has worked good. People noted also one interesting detail. One of the close friends of Oswald was a rich American, George de Morenschin, with Belarusian roots, who was born in Belarusian city of Mazyr in 1911, but his mysterious life ended in suicide in 1977. Interesting fact about Belarus in the state of Texas. 1,500 Belarus. How much time?
No.
It's my only personal impression.
You covered a couple of on your topic about our position on genocide of
Yeah,
Belarusian
yeah.
people.
I
So we're very
prepared
thankful.
assessments of my paper, and I would like satisfied that you have read it. Somewhat about the genocide of Belarusian people. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has signed January 5, 2022, a law on the genocide of Belarusian people. The law provides legal recognition of the genocide of the Belarusian people committed by Nazi criminals and their accomplices during the Great Patriotic War and the post-war period up to 1951. The Belarusian people are viewed as all Soviet citizens who lived on the territory of Belarus during that period. That it means Belarusians, Russians, Polish, Ukrainians, Jewish. It also establishes criminal liability for public denial of the genocide of the Belarusian people. I'd like to pay your attention to the sphere of education, primary, high, and higher schools. What had a task to organize political, educational, and propaganda work on this topic. In November this year, were published textbook, to be exactly, for schools, genocide of the Belarusian people during the Great Patriotic War, prepared by the Prosecutor General's Office and the Ministry of Education. Belarusian school children will start studying the topic of genocide during the Second World War from the first grade. As for me, I prepared a textbook, History of Foreign Policy of Belarus in Belarus for the students of our faculty. And this new edition, there are materials about the genocide of the Belarusian people during the Great Patriotic War and the Nazi Germany policy regarding Belarus before and during World War II. And at the end, about war criminals. In April 21, I prepared a report or conclusion to the General Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Belarus on the activity of the Belarusian SSR in international arena on the issue of extradition and punishment of war criminals. I'd like to underline that for the initiative of the Belarusian SSR delegation, the first session of the General Assembly in 1946 adopted a resolution on extradition and punishment of war criminals. And since then, Belarusian delegation has took part in very actively in this sphere. And on the 23rd session of the General Assembly, 1968, there was adopted the Convention on the non-application of status of limitation to crimes against humanity and war crimes. Finishing my paper in English, what lives to be better, I'd like to express my wish to take part in discussion a little in English, in Russian, or Belarusian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So maybe you have questions?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions.
And Professor Dr. Cunningham, so we will translate to our professor, okay? So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, first question I had was how many people have they counted for that were killed by the Nazis during the Great Patriotic War? Because I've heard as many as like 1/3 of the population, and that's it's just amazing. A lot more than we had ever anticipated. But doing your research and doing stuff like this, why do you think it's so important today to go ahead and educate students like from the first grade on in Belarus? But I think we should probably do the same here in the United States. I don't think we're getting the full story about how great of a problem this actually was. Could you address something like that? How many people and how great of a problem this actually is when it comes to education? And what you're doing in Belarus?
Okay, we will translate shortly. Okay. Professor will answer in Russian and we will translate in English, okay? Thank you.
Что касается жертв жителей Беларуси, и мирные жители, и военные, военнопленные, то где-то лет 40-50 после войны была устойчивая цифра каждый четвертый. До войны Беларусь имела 10 миллионов, каждый четвертый это 2,5 миллиона. Карина, можете перевести?
Good morning. I'm going to translate the word. I'm going to translate the words of our honorable professor. So, according to Professor Snapkovsky, 1/4 of every Belarusian died during the World Patriotic War. You understood, and it is approximately 2.5 million people.
Так, я продолжаю. Но вот в последние 10-15 лет были проведены историками, архивистами более углубленные исследования, которые установили большее число жертв. И вот сейчас эта цифра оценивается 1/3, то есть около 3 миллионов жителей Беларуси погибло в годы Великой Отечественной войны.
I'm sorry, I was not accurate in my first translation. So the figure 2.5 million people was after the first 40 and 50 years after the end of the war. But according to the nowadays statistics, the number is 1/3 of the whole Belarusian population. It is approximately 3 million Belarusians.
Yeah, that just seems amazing. I think Belarus should be complimented for all the work that they're doing in this area. This is a very good procedure. Professor, if I am understanding this correctly, I believe that the Jewish population in Belarus at the time was a little less than 1 million, or right around 1 million. Who were the other people that were murdered? Or who are some of the other groups of people that were murdered besides just the Jewish people to get to this?
Can I take this question, please? Okay. Yes, okay, yes, the Jewish population lived in Belarus, and maybe about our city Vitebsk. This is a small city on the north of Belarus, where before war, the estimated number of Jewish population was around, I think, 80,000 people, but after this, the Second World War II, so it was around 800 people. So yes, Jewish population, of course, was murdered. But also, I would like to say that not only Jewish population, but as well as Russians, Belarusians, different other nationalities who lived in Minsk in Belarus were also among those people who were killed, murdered by fascists during the 4 years during 3 years of occupation in Belarus. It's not only the losses between Jewish population, it's the whole number of Belarusians, okay? Around 3 million people.
It's just really unbelievable, and I must really say how happy, not happy, but how grateful I am to see people like yourself and people like your prosecutor general who are actually prosecuting these crimes even to the very end. Not every country's doing this, and I think more people should appreciate what you're doing, because it is something that needs to be done for a long time. Jim, do you have a question or anything?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment mentioning Norman Mailer's Oswald's tale. There are two types of defense of the Warren Commission. One is represented by Gerald Posner's Case Closed, and by even more egregiously by Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History, 1,500 pages, attempting to defend and support the Warren Commission, really revolving around the magic bullet theory, which David Mantik, MD, PhD, the leading expert on the medical evidence in the assassination of JFK, has determined is not even anatomically possible. He found a patient with similar chest and neck dimensions, created a CAT scan, and plotted the official trajectory from the back of the base of the neck to the throat, and found it's not even possible because cervical vertebrae intervene. Oswald's tale is intended to compensate for the absence of any discernible motive that Lee Oswald might have had for shooting JFK, but in my judgment represents a massive psychobabble that ought never to have appeared. I'm convinced that both Mailer and Bugliosi were paid large sums of money by the American government to provide books that would help to fill in the gaps and support an account that most Americans no longer believe today.
Thank you very much. I guess now, if we are through with the people from Belarus, are we going to listen to Dr. Fetzer next?
Mike, may I make a quick comment?
Yes, go ahead.
You asked a question about why it is important to teach people to genocide, to give them information on the crimes of genocide, starting from first grade students in the elementary school. And I will make a comment, and maybe our Belarusian colleagues will want to add a little bit on that, but it appears to me that teaching historical truth, even the truth about the darkest pages of the history, is extremely important, so that young people will grow and will understand that these things happened. This is the tragedy, and we all have to do whatever we can in order not to have these things repeated. And if we turn a blind eye on the history and forget about history, we will not have a future, and our country will go nowhere, especially in these current circumstances. That's how it appears to me. And it is extremely important that, as I already mentioned to you on previous events, it is extremely important that young people, school children, and university students would participate in the activity done in every part of the country to uncover the horrible crimes of the Nazis, to dig the graves, excavate the remains of the people, analyze these locations. And every location that has been uncovered after the investigators have done their job, school children would come there and participate and learn from prosecutors and local officials, local historians about specific atrocities committed in that particular place. And this is a good educational point, and I think it has to be preserved and repeated. And unlike some of the neighboring states, which are destroying World War monuments, destroying the monuments to the soldiers who liberated their country from the Nazis, we are preserving the historical memory. And actually, the task of the Office of the Prosecutor General is to erect a monument or a plaque in every place, in every mass grave that has been uncovered. So that's a very important task. И, может быть, наши белорусские коллеги, профессор Снапковский, хотел бы несколько слов сказать о важности обучения проблеме геноцида, начиная с первого класса школы, насколько это важно. Мне кажется, это было бы Майку интересно. Спасибо.
Yes, of course, I quite agree with you about importance of this problem in our educational process, in our researches. If we want to save memory about last year, about great patriotic year, patriotic war, yes. Of course, we have to learn our students, our school children, our children, our young generations, and our even people of my generation, not to не забывать, да? Not to forget about it, not to forget, because to my opinion, every generation, any new generation of Belarusians and people who live in our territory must think and preserve memory about this tragedy of Belarusian people. Сейчас, может быть, пару слов на русском хотел бы добавить, исходя из моего курса «История внешней политики Беларуси», которую я читаю студентам 30 лет. Там есть раздел Белоруссию в годы Второй мировой войны. Есть подраздел Беларусь в планах и политике нацистской Германии, и где мы рассматриваем вот со студентами и Беларусь в геополитических планах Гитлера, оккупационную политику. Вот. И, конечно, вот проблема геноцида, о которой здесь было сказано, и вот в указе президента в законе, действительно подчеркнуто, что это не только проблема Холокоста, а это проблема всех жителей Беларуси, всех граждан того.
Honorable Professor said that in the framework of the discipline that he teaches at the Faculty of International Relations, the discipline is called History of Belarusian Foreign Policy. There is one topic that is called Belarus during the Second World War. And in the framework of this topic, honorable professor teaches our students about Belarus influence of Nazis, occupational politics, genocide of Jews, and professor points out that the problem of the massive killings is not only the problem of Jews, it's the whole national problem of all Belarusians.
Я сказала университетском, а вот действительно новые учебники появились именно в этом месяце. И это учебники для 3 ступеней средней школы. Или так, для начальной школы, среднего уровня и уже старших классов.
So now Professor adds that this year the new set of textbooks on the history of genocide in the framework of school education have appeared, and these students' books are used as nursery, also in middle and in high schools.
Да, и, конечно, каждый возраст будет по-своему воспринимать это. Но важно, чтобы дети об этом знали, дети об этом не забывали. Ну вот я снова к своим годам хочу вернуться. Была такая книга «Никогда не забудем». Это 1965 год. Вот мы его читали на улице. Да, страшная книга, там узники, там дети в лагерях, в тюрьмах. И вот, вы знаете, вот этот страх, с одной стороны, ненависть к врагу другой, вот он как-то сохранился в умах и сердцах, так я бы сказал.
Also, Professor added that according to the age of children, this problem will be perceived in different way. But no matter how old you are, we're speaking about children and pupils, it's very important never to forget about this strategy and always to remember. And also, Professor Snapkovsky shared his childhood memories when he was a young boy. He and his friends used to read a book that was called "We Will Never Forget." And this book contained information about the horrors of the war, and that is why even till now the bad attitude towards the enemy preserves.
Еще одну деталь, вот, на которую обратил белорусский президент Александр Лукашенко, все-таки политическая подоплека этого закона. Он так сказал прямо, что раньше мы не хотели своих соседей западных вот, как-то упрекать, напоминать, особенно Германию, с которой у нас хорошие отношения, Польша, страны Балтики. Ну, вот политическая ситуация и геополитика мы заставили все-таки и к этим не совсем, может быть, приятным вещам вернуться. И вот этим также продиктован принятие этого закона и наша вот эта государственная кампания, государственная политика.
And now Professor Snapkovsky added that the President Alexander Lukashenko used to say that in our policy, Belarus didn't want to blame Germany, Poland, or Baltic states, other our neighboring countries on the horrors of war. But nowadays, because of the specific geopolitical situation and position, the new law was issued that contains the importance of teaching the history about the Great Patriotic War in schools nowadays.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Professor Elena, could you tell us a little bit about your school? And I know you just celebrate a 100-year anniversary. I think it was 2021, but tell us a little bit about the school and particularly a little bit about your Department of International Relations.
Okay, during the Soviet time, Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic used to have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belarus because we are the founders of the United Nations, but we had never had a school on international relations during the Soviet time. After gaining the independence in 1991, in 1993, there was an initiative of Belarusian State University to open the first school in international relations at our university. And finally, in 1995, the Faculty of International Relations was organized. Now we have 6 majors in international relations, international law, world economy, customs, Oriental studies, management in hospitality and tourism. The total number of students for now are around 2,000. Among them, 300 are foreign students, mostly from China, People Republic. We have MA programs in English, mostly in international law and international relations. And since 1995, around 10,000 students graduated from the Faculty of International Relations. Our faculty is the only one in Belarus. There is no more any other school on international relations in our universities. So as we used to say that we are leading school in teaching students in international activities, to be a part of international relations, or to work in international law and so on and so forth. So this is our school. We have a separate building which was opened by President Lukashenko in 2019. We have a lot of outstanding graduates. Among them are 8 ambassadors of Belarus to different countries. We are proud of this, and around 30% of Ministry of Foreign Affairs staff are graduates from our university. So we have around 300 professors and teachers, 2,000 students, around 100 Doctor of Science and candidate and PhD. So this is a short information.
Very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we have no further, let's go ahead with Dr. Fetzer. Dr. Fetzer has written several books on the JFK, and he'd like to present something for your faculty and your students there. Dr. Fetzer, if you could go ahead. Thank you.
Well, for over 30 years, since 1992, I have engaged in collaborative research on the assassination by bringing together the best qualified students to ever study the case. Bob Livingston, MD, a world authority on the human brain, who is also an expert on wound ballistics, having supervised an emergency medical hospital for injured Okinawans and Japanese prisoners of war during the Battle of Okinawa, now deceased. David W. Mantic, MD, PhD in physics from Wisconsin, MD from Michigan, board certified in radiation oncology, who entered the National Archives in late 1992 with the permission of the Kennedy family to study the autopsy x-rays and photographs. A physician who was present in trauma room number 1 when JFK's moribund body was brought in for treatment, a leading expert on the JFK assassination films, another PhD in physics, this time with a specialty in electromagnetism for properties of light and of images of moving objects. I've continued that research ever since, publishing initially 3 books at Vincent Bugliosi, described as the only exclusively scientific books ever published on the Assassination Science 1998, Murder in Dealey Plaza 2000, and The Great Zapruder Film Hoax 2003. What I'm going to present today is a distillation of our collaborative research and more recent developments of late, because I've continued with research on JFK, including a new JFK show virtually on a weekly basis, addressing the latest developments and releases from the National Archives, which include, remarkably enough, now the passport Oswald was allegedly using in order to escape to Russia by way of Cuba, which actually has stamped on the passport, not valid for travel to Cuba, which is just one indication of the enormity of the scam perpetrated on the world in the assassination of JFK. Let me begin then. What we know now that we didn't know then. I'm very pleased to be here. We all know of the official account, 3 shots fired from the 6th floor window. That evening, the FBI and the Secret Service agreed there had been 3 shots and 3 hits. That Jack had been hit in the back, about 5.5 inches below the shoulder to the right of the spinal column, that Conley had been hit in the back, and that Jack had been hit in the back of the head, killing him. It would not be until later, after it was discovered that a shot had missed and injured a distant bystander, that they had to account for all the wounds on the basis of only 2 bullets and introduce the magic bullet theory, which David Manick has demonstrated to be anatomically impossible. Oliver Stone in 1991 created a masterpiece suggesting an alternative to the official account, which is the most accurate, complete, and comprehensive depiction of what happened in Dealey Plaza ever presented to the public through the mass media. It was flawed in 3 specific respects. He did not know, for example, that Lee Oswald was actually standing in the doorway of the book depository when the JFK motorcade passed by, meaning he not only cannot have been the lone demanded gunman, he cannot have been one of what turned out to be 8 different assassins. He did not know that the Zapruder film had been extensively edited to remove the turn from Houston on to end, where the driver, William Greer, swung out too widely and nearly hit a concrete abutment. That would have shaken confidence in the Secret Service, so it was removed. And later, after Jack had been hit twice in the back and in the throat, but was still alive, the driver, William Greer, pulled the limousine to the left and to a halt to make sure Jack would be killed, during which he was hit 2 or even 3 times in the head, as I shall explain. And 30 posited 3 hit teams, when in fact there were actually 8. When acting press secretary Malcolm Kilduff announced the death of the president, he pointed to his right temple, saying it was a simple matter of a bullet right through the head, attributing that finding to Admiral George Berkeley, who was the president's personal physician. Indeed, on television that afternoon and evening, 2 shots were widely reported. A small, clean puncture wound to the throat, which Malcolm Perry, MD, described 3 times during the Parkland press conference as a wound of entry, and that shot to the right temple, which passed through his head and blew half his brains out the back of his head, such that later in the evening, when they'd been reporting these 2 shots, 2 hits, both of which had been fired from in front, Frank McGee is responding to reports from the FBI and the Secret Service that there were 3 shots from above and behind. He says, this is incongruous. How can a man have been shot from in front, from behind? But if you put together those 2 shots that were widely reported that day, the shot to the back, which was fired from the county record building, the shot to the throat, which was fired from inside the triple underpass, together with the shot to the back of the head that the Warren Commission had correct, in correction, the shot to the back was from the county records building. That was an accurate hit. And the shot to the back of the head, which was in Daltex, was an accurate hit. With the two that were reported on radio and television, the shot to the throat and the shot to the right temple, then you have 4 hits to JFK, which is accurate, where David Manick now believes there may have been yet a 3rd shot to the head from the side. The mortician who prepared the body for burial told an investigator, in addition to a large gaping hole in the back of the head, there was a small wound in the right temple, a wound at the back, 5 to 6 inches below the shoulder to the right of the spinal column. You may notice here, he says there was no swelling or discoloration to the face, meaning that he died instantly. Decades later, most Americans doubt the lone gunman theory. This is a new poll from Gallup. 65% of Americans think Kennedy's assassination involved a conspiracy. Peculiarly, Democrats, college-educated adults, less likely to say it was a conspiracy. U.S. government named most often as co-conspirator, 20%, up from 2013. We'll see how well 65% of Americans have it right. There are more than 15 proofs that the Secret Service set him up for the hit and then acted to cover it up. 2 Secret Service agents who would accompany the limousine were left behind at Love Hill by Emory Roberts, the agent in charge of Presidential Protection Detail. Here, one of them, Henry Ripka, expresses dismay at being called off. The motorcycle escort was reduced to 4, who instructed Knight to ride forward of the rear wheels of the presidential limousine. One of them observed it was the damnedest formation he'd ever seen. JFK's military aide, who normally sat between the driver and the agent in charge, was moved to the last vehicle, along with the president's personal physician. There are more than 15 indications. In addition to the agent being left behind at Love Field, manhole covers were not welded shut, open windows were not covered. The crowd was allowed to spill into the street. 110th Military Intelligence Unit was ordered to stand down against the adamant opposition of its commanding officer, which meant they could not provide crowd control. Look at this. There was even a bus where an assassin with a handgun could have taken out JFK. Simply absurd. Governor Connolly was instrumental in making a change to the motorcycle route on November 18th, 4 days before the event. Normally, a motorcade route, once fixed, is never changed, so the Secret Service can check every building and screen its occupants. This change brought the president past the school book depository building, where Lee Oswald had found a job just weeks before. Most tellingly, the vehicles were in an improper sequence. The presidential limousine was placed first. Lower-ranking dignitaries, such as the mayor and the vice president, should have preceded him. Reporters were moved to the rear and the president's personal physician to the last car, which put him in the worst location should the patient require emergency medical treatment. Moreover, instead of uniform black limousines, typically Cadillacs, these were vehicles of all different makes, models, and colors, so the conspirators could know exactly where everyone was in the motorcade. At Parkland Hospital, where the moribund president was taken, a Secret Service agent took a bucket and sponge and began cleaning up the blood and brains from the limousine. When onlookers noticed a through-and-through hole in the windshield, the vehicle was moved. Now, that appears to have been Sam Kinney. It was the driver of the Secret Service Cadillac who confided in a neighbor, only to be revealed after his death that he had found a whole slug, apparently the shot to JFK's back that had worked its way out, and had taken it inside and left it on a stretcher. That, of course, was the origin of the magic bullet, but there was nothing magic about it. Also, of course, the Secret Service gathered the x-rays and the photographs from the autopsy, and the next time we saw them, they had been altered. Meanwhile, in relation to the Zapruder film, they merged 2 shots to the head and blacked out a blow to the back of the head, but it's visible later. Here we have the whole movie, 27 seconds, 487 frames. You'll see the jump where they took out the turn from Houston on down. All of a sudden, boom, there's the motorcade going behind the Stemmons freeway sign, which they replaced improperly. You'll see the hit here coming up. Boom. They actually merged two different shots, as I'm going to explain. This was done in a very sophisticated fashion. Here we have frame 312 just before. You see, Jack actually is going to move forward to 313 and then violently back. Josiah Thompson, in his book 6 Seconds in Dallas, did a wonderful study of the frames and discovered that from 312 to 313, there's forward motion from a shot to the back of the head, but from 313 back and to the left in an exaggerated fashion because they removed too many frames. Here you see a graph of the up to 312, then you see the motion forward from the hit to the back of the head, and then the violent back and to the left from the successive frames. David Banting discovered an area at the back of the lateral cranial autopsy on the right as area P that was far too dense to be human bone. He discovered this using a technique known as optical densitometry from physics. Well, in 314, you can't see the blowout to the back of the head because it's concealed. This, sometimes called the blob, appears to have been moved from the back of the head, again, moved from the back of the head where they blacked it out, again, moved from the back of the head, again, moved from the back of the head where they covered it up. But it occurred to me they'd spent so much time on blacking out the wound in early frames, they might have overlooked it could be seen in later, and I found in frame 374, when Jackie's climbing out to get a chunk of Jack's skull and brains on the trunk, you can actually see the wound. Here you see, remember, it's kind of bluish gray. Remember how often brain matter is called grayed matter. This is a pinkish bone extension. If you go back to the mortician's report, a 3-inch crescent shape that appears to have been blown out by that third shot to the head. So here you see before, this is 312, and after, and here you can see the blowout being visible, partially concealed by hair. When you compare then area P, there's a very close proximity. It's like a cashew shell on the side, where again, I observe the hair partially obscures, but it's a very close match. The motorcycle escort officers turned out to be extraordinarily important. Fred Newcomb interviewed all 4 of them and their supervisor, Stavrosalis. It turns out during the limo stop, he was hit at least twice in the head, possibly thrice. Officer Baker to the left rear dismounted his bike, ran between the cars to the grassy knoll, which would have been impossible had they been in motion. Officer Jackson rode his bike up the grassy knoll until it fell over and then proceeded on foot. 5 Secret Service agents dismounted, surrounded the presidential limousine. One grabbed a piece of chunk from a little boy. Now in the film, they all make it look as though it's continuous, but it is very close to when the limo stop took place. So here you have Hargis on the left rear parking his bike, running up the grassy knoll. Jackson motoring up the grassy knoll. 5 surrounding the limousine, grabbing the chunk of skull from the little boy. Here you can see in the Bell film tire marks from Officer Jackson having motored up the side of the grassy knoll, which is virtually not reported at all, except in the Oklahoma City Times. A motorcycle patrolman rode pell-mell up a railroad embankment, apparently in pursuit of the assassin. Here you have Bobby Hargis returning to his bike. After that, a stop that I originally thought might be 6 or 8 seconds, but I cannot reconcile with less than 20, the motorcade sped off to the Parkland Hospital. They use optical printing and special effects. This is an optical printer that allows you to combine any foreground with any background. They could have had JFK doing backflips had they so desired. If you look at the film again in the motionless spectators, that appears to have been the imposition of footage taken earlier when the pilot car passed by to conceal something they did not want us to see on the side of the vehicle. So here is the third of my 3 books of expert essays. This is the film used to take. It was used a 16 millimeter double-8 film. You'd shoot down one side, then take it out, flip it over, and shoot the other side. They made a substitute for the original film that was developed in Dallas and taken to the National Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, the 23rd. It was an 8mm all-ray split film developed in Dallas. But on Sunday, a second film was brought down. It was a 16mm unsplit film that had been developed in Rochester, and the substitution was made of the edited film for the original. There should have been about 1,000 frames altogether, but they've actually removed 100 from the turn from Houston onto Elm, and then 400 more for the limo stop. So we're missing more frames than we have in the extant version. Framing the Patsy. Lee was in the doorway when the JFK motorcade passed by. They made him remove his overshirt before doing mug shots. He told Will Fritz, a homicide investigator, investigating his face had been posted on someone else's body when he was shown the backyard photographs. Indeed, everything Oswald told Fritz, including that it was out front with Bill Shelley, one of his supervisors, when the motorcade passed by, has turned out to be true. Here's the most important photograph by James Ike Alchins. You can see right here a small hole in the windshield from the bullet passing through. By the way, we have a student by the name of Jim Lewis who's been going through junkyards in the South and firing high velocity wounds to see if he could hit a dummy in the back seat. And he discovered not only is it a makeable shot, but it makes the sound of a firecracker passing through. Here you have the area where Lee Oswald was in the background. We'll take a closer look. Lyndon's motorcycle security are already responding. This is a window to the broom closet of a uranium mining operation that was a CIA front, from which 3 shots with a Mannlicher Carcana were fired by an anti-Castro Cuban. These were the only unsilent shots intended to create the acoustical impression of only 3 shots having been fired. So when you take a closer look, you can already see some anomalies. Notice how Lee seems to be missing his left shoulder. The figure behind him is known as Black Tie Man. He's both in front of him and behind him at the same time. This individual holding his hands up is known as Black Hole Man because his face has been blacked out and his shirt has been obfuscated. We will explain the reasons why. Here, closer up, you see exactly what I'm talking about. And this face also was added of a black man to obfuscate that the shirt he was wearing was tattered and torn. It turns out Maria remembers having actually laundered that shirt when Lee brought back from Russia. Richard Hook has done a study of Lee when he was arrested with a man in the doorway. He began finding 6 or 7 similarities. He's gone up to 100. In order to obfuscate it was the same person, they had Lee remove his outer shirt and be photographed in his T-shirt. Billy Lovelady, meanwhile, was brought in on the 29th of February, 1964, and asked to wear the same clothing he wore the day of the assassination. He wore blue jeans and a red and white vertically striped shirt seen here. A report about this was sent to J. Edgar Hoover, claiming this proved Billy Lovelady was a man in the doorway. Here you see Larry Rivera having done a superposition on the facial features. So we not only have a man with the same height, the same wilt, the same build, the same shirt, the same T-shirt, but he has the same facial feature. Just for comparison, he sought to superimpose Billy Lovelady. But you see how defective the chin is wrong, the nose is wrong. It's clearly not Billy, who was in the doorway, but elsewhere. Again, here you see, it was Lee in the doorway, which is a total exoneration. Both Harold Weisberg, by the way, in his Photographic Whitewash, Volume 2, published 1966, observed in the last 4 pages that the Warren Commission staff was having a hard time concealing the fact that Lee was in the doorway during the motorcade. Meanwhile, the man with his hands raised, Black Hole Man, turns out to have been Billy Lovelady. It's a perfect match. So Larry Rivera's also done a reconstruction of what that photograph ought to have looked like had it been in color, with, of course, variations. So you had Lee in his dark reddish brown richly textured shirt, and Billy Lovelady in his red and white vertically striped shirt. The contrast could not be more dramatic. Meanwhile, Lee was also framed by means of the backyard photograph. This one appeared on the cover of Life magazine as shown. So you have Lee with a revolver on his side and holding the Mannlicher Kano, where he's supposed to have shot Officer Ticket with a revolver, but that too was staged. And he fired no shot during the assassination, holding two communist newspapers, the Militant and the Worker. So this is supposed to combine motive and means, where, of course, we already knew he had the opportunity because he was at the book depository. Well, Larry found Officer Roscoe White, who was CIA, who was actually in Dealey Plaza at the time, was the body double for Lee in the background. He found a photograph of Roscoe in a swimsuit and superimposed on the physique, and it's a perfect match. Lee was so diminutive, so much smaller, that you see Roscoe is far larger than Lee in terms of the backyard photographs. Jim Mars and I years ago collaborated on an article where we agreed that the man in the backyard photograph was Roscoe White, in part because he has this odd bump on his wrist from a bone that did not properly heal. And you can find that on the man in the backyard photographs as well. Meanwhile, the best way to understand the assassination is to draw a distinction between the sponsors, the facilitators, and the mechanics. Where the mechanics were the shooters, their supervisors and coordinators, who included George Herbert Walker Bush, who was actually in the Daltex, supervising the anti-Castro Cuban who fired those 3 shots with the unsilenced Mannlicher Kano, and Edward Lansdale, famous for conducting assassinations around the world, including Operation Phoenix in Vietnam, who appears to have positioned the shooters and determined the sequence of shots. There were many powerful forces who wanted Jack out, principally for reasons of policy. He was threatening the CIA to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. They weren't happy about that. He had removed 2 of its deputy directors, Richard Bissell and Charles Cabell, who were icons of the intelligence community, where Cabell was the brother of the mayor of Dallas, Earl Cabell, at the time of the assassination. The Joint Chiefs threw in because they were upset with Jack for having refused to invade Cuba when they unanimously recommended for having signed an above-ground test ban treaty, which they unanimously opposed, and now for pulling our forces out of Vietnam, where they believed a stand had to be taken against the expansion of international godless communism. It was all a myth, a fabrication. The Vietnamese were fiercely nationalistic. They weren't going to succumb to the influence of Red China. Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia were not going to fall, but that was the ground that was sold to the American people for why we had to be there. The anti-Castro Cubans wanted revenge. They believed Jack had abandoned them at the Bay of Pigs by not providing air cover. That was false. Jack had made it clear from the beginning that there was to be no obvious American involvement. The CIA actually had even learned that the Soviets knew the date of the invasion and had shared it with Fidel Castro. So Castro knew we were coming. The Soviets knew we were coming. The CIA knew we were coming. The only party who was not involved was the commander-in-chief himself, who undoubtedly would have called it off. The mafia was upset with Jack because they had an agreement, I believe, with their father, Joe, not with Bobby or Jack, that if they assisted Jack in being elected, that the administration would lay off the mob. Instead, Bobby brought about more indictments and convictions than ever before in history. The Eastern establishment surrounding the Fed was upset because Jack had had the Department of Treasury print United States notes on the ground that it was absurd for the American government to be paying a consortium of private banks interest for bringing the currency of the United States. I remember as a young Marine Corps officer holding one of these bills in my hand with a red embossed imprint saying United States note. The Texas oilmen were upset because Jack was going to cut the oil depletion allowance, which was close to 24%, justified on the ground that oil was supposed to be a finite resource, and therefore they were putting themselves out of business by pumping it out of the ground. Jack was also at loggerheads with David Ben-Gurion, who was a founder and the first prime minister of Israel, over Israel's determination to develop nuclear weapons, when Jack opposed in the belief that it would set off a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. And LBJ, who as vice president had set this up long before in order to ascend to the presidency, to become president of all the people. To learn more about LBJ, read Phil Nelson's magisterial work, LBJ Mastermind of JFK's Assassination. The facilitators of the assassination, Lyndon himself, and of the cover-up, J. Edgar Hoover. Here's an approximation of what actually happened in Dealey Plaza. The first shot, fired from the top of the county records building, hit Jack in the back. The second, fired from inside the triple underpass, passed through the windshield, hit Jack in the throat. Meanwhile, 3 shots were being fired from the Dow Tex with a Mannlicher Carcano, one of which missed and injured the distant bystander James Tague. Another of which missed and hit a chrome strip over the limousine. But after the driver drove the limousine to the left into a halt, he was hit in the back of the head. He slumped forward. The mafia shooter here fired the shot, entered the right temple, blew his brains out the back of his head. And Mantic now believes he may have hit another shot to the head by the Israeli shooter who was in the vicinity of the pergola. This shot is supposed to represent Roscoe White, who had a handgun. It was the easiest shot, but from the closest distance, but he would have hit Jackie. They were under strict instruction, she must be harmed. So he bullet shot it, wound up in the grass. It was picked up by a Dallas police lieutenant by the name of Day and never seen again. At some point, the Texas oilman shooter at the top of the county record building fired another shot that left a mark by a manhole cover in this vicinity. Altogether, there were 12 or 13 shots fired. Lyndon's personal hitman, Malcolm Mack Wallace, who murdered a dozen people for Lyndon, including one of his own sisters, fired 2 or 3 shots at John Connally in the mistaken belief it was Ralph Yarborough, a liberal Texas senator Lyndon despised. In fact, Lyndon had engineered Jack's trip to Texas to mend the fence between the liberal and the conservative wings of the Texas Democrat Party. They had a huge argument that morning where Lyndon was trying to get Connally out and Yarborough in, but Jack overrode him on the ground that the chief executive of the state should ride with the chief executive of the United States. It was too late to get the words to the assassin. So, in fact, because Connally was wounded, and most people couldn't believe he would put his crony in harm's way, it obfuscated the politics of the assassination. There have been so many theories, including KGB, Castro, the mafia. When you understand the way in which a cover-up was carried out, you recognize KGB, for example, could not have extended its reach into Bethesda Naval Hospital to alter x-rays under control of medical officers of the U.S. Navy and the Secret Service. And anti-Castro or Castro Cubans could not have substituted another brain for the brain of JFK, which was also done. The mafia could not have got its hands on the Zapruder film in order to subject it to massive alteration. Noel Twyman was the first to truly put together what had happened here. In his book, Bloody Treason, published in 1997, he saw the most perfect combination with the greatest probability of success was CIA military combined with Secret Service, combined with Mafia, combined with LBJ, combined with Hoover. With LBJ and the conspiratorial group, Hoover could have been relied upon to fall in line. The Mafia having compromised him, he was willing to do it regardless. Perhaps that risk would have been acceptable once they had LBJ in their circle as the most valuable member, because he would become president, thereby have immediate authority over the entire executive branch, including Secret Service, military, CIA, and the FBI. This represents the entire investigative and prosecuting capability of the United States government, with a possible exception of congressional investigating committees, which he immediately quashed by forming the Warren Commission, with all the appointees selected by himself, and where J. Edgar and the FBI were appointed as a sole investigative agency. Thus, I assumed at a minimum the plotters were CIA military, Secret Service, Mafia, LBJ. He got it right. In fact, the conspiracy began in Los Angeles in 1960 when JFK beat LBJ for the nomination of the Democratic Party. Jack invited Stuart Symington, a senator from Missouri, to be his running mate, but gave him overnight to think about it. Bobby Kennedy went by the Johnson suite to extend a pro forma symbolic gesture of running with the president, never expecting he'd have the least interest. Johnson, to his astonishment, leaped on it, threatened to expose that Jack had Addison's disease and was not expected to live a long, healthy life. That among his dalliances had been one with an East German woman who was a spy for that nation, and that if he were not on the ticket, then any legislative proposal sent down by the White House would be dead on arrival, because in his position as a powerful majority leader, he would bottle them up. Bobby and Jack were boxed in. They tried to figure a way out, but there was none. They had to accede to Lyndon's demand. When one of his wealthy backers learned that Johnson would be on the ticket, he burst into the Johnson suite, cursing and swearing that now LBJ would help JFK become president. Bobby Baker took him into a bedroom and explained what they had in mind. He came out all smiles, saying he thought that was an excellent plan. Bobby Baker would later declare in public JFK would not live out his first term and that he would die a violent death. Lyndon Johnson would send his chief administrative assistant, Cliff Carter, down to Dallas to make sure all the arrangements were in place for the assassination. Thus, I have published a fourth book bringing these matters up to date. JFK, Who, How, and Why, Solving the World's Greatest Murder Mystery, which I'm privileged to share with you here today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fetzer. Pablo, do you have any comments, or I think you probably saw this for the first time, and then we go to the people at Belarus State University if they have any comments.
Yeah, it's a very serious piece of work, very serious examination, and of course it requires more study by the professionals, but definitely there are points that that deserve attention. So I will use the opportunity and the presentation to read more into it and make a conclusion. But this opens a lot of answers a lot of questions, I think.
Okay. How about the students at Belarus State University studying international diplomacy and stuff? What do you see when you hear something like this? What do you think?
We have some comments. Yeah.
Yes, go.
Yeah, thank you. I think what we've heard here and we saw on the screen, that James made a quite thorough investigation of the matter. And for sure, he proved that the JFK assassination could not be work of a lonely killer, that's for sure. Secondly, he proved that there was a conspiracy behind it. And also, he proved that a very low probability of the KGB involvement in the matter. So mystery remains a mystery. Frankly, what I saw, what I hear, looks very, very probable, and maybe that's the way it was. Maybe that's the way it was. Not accidentally, still we have books and articles which devoted to the matter. Even today, 60 years later, the assassination. So James made a very great job, and thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you for those very appropriate comments. I'm going to provide a link to another extended where I have much, much more evidence about the shooters, how the shots went down, how they altered the medical evidence, and so forth for your consideration. I'll ask Mike to add that to the program or report of our meeting today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Fetzer. I had two additional things I'm adding as well, instead of giving a presentation so you could take a look at it. But Dr. Fetzer kind of mentioned one, the Warren Commission wasn't even the legal investigating committee. It was basically something that LBJ put together so he could control. It was supposed to be an inquiry down here in the Texas courts, and we're still trying to get one going. So I have a large information about that. Any more comments from Belarus?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. We surely appreciate this today, and the opportunity to get to talk is just amazing. 6 years ago tomorrow will be the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. And like everyone has said, it's still a mystery. And even we take a look at greater mystery is probably the genocide that we're going to be talking about in the next several weeks, about how we're finding out that there are more and more people that were killed, which leads me to believe the greater problem here is that I think that many of us need to, like Pavel said, we need to seek out the truth. And I'm so encouraged to see young people studying diplomacy and how important it is now more than ever. So this is a very good possibility that we will try to continue this on a different line, maybe in the spring. I'd like to thank Pavlo, and I'd like to thank the people from Belarus. I'd like to thank the students, and I'd like to thank Dr. Fetzer. Any more closing comments? Dr. Fetzer.
Oh, I'm just tremendously grateful. I found this story about Oswald in Minsk fascinating. And I now believe he was recruited in part because they thought he could use him as a ladies' man. I mean, this romancing, that aspect is just stunning to me, something I had not appreciated. By the way, his pseudo defection occurred on a Sunday when he renounced his citizenship, but the embassy was closed. It had no legal significance. And I think now that it was part of establishing his persona as a pro-communist Castro sympathizer by even marrying a Russian woman who turned out to be the niece of a KGB colonel. I mean, it's fascinating how all of this has played out. I cannot thank you enough for sharing that information with me. Wonderful, wonderful. I found this extremely valuable. All parties here, I'm grateful to you, one and all.
Pavel,
I want to thank everyone for participating in this event. And I think it is important from 2 points of view. It's important to find historical truth, and it's important to preserve it for us and for future generations. And I think United States and Belarus are close from this point of view, because like us, you are not afraid of showing different stages of your history, and you're not you are sincere about preserving and telling people and young people historical truths. So that's exactly what we are doing, and we are not trying to, build to destroy historical buildings and to destroy monuments, but rather to preserve them and tell what really happened. And the case of JFK assassination is a case like that. So people have to know different versions, and people have to know the truth and have a chance to get closer to the truth. And I really applaud the work of James in this case. And I look forward to receiving more information and getting more deeply into that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Professor Elena, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, on behalf of our colleagues, I would like to thank you and Pavel Adamovich and Professor Fetzer for such an interesting event, for such a deep analysis, and for trying to keep the historical truths, trying to trying to keep the traditions of a very high level scientific research, and to use it in our work, in our teaching. So thank you very much, and I hope it's like a very first step of our possible future cooperation. We are very looking forward to next steps, and I think it was a very interesting and very good event between American and Belarusian scholars. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll say goodbye. And thank you again for everybody from the bottom of my heart, and have a very blessed day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Let me stop.